Isaac Holloway raised his glass beneath the soft lights of the patio, the kind of practiced smile that always convinced a room he belonged at the center of it. Beside him stood his new bride, Madeline Carter, young, radiant, and certain she had stepped into a life that someone else had quietly failed to keep. When a guest casually asked about his former wife, Isaac chuckled. "Oh, Gillian," he said lightly. "She moved on. Some people just aren't built for this kind of life." A few polite laughs drifted through the crowd. What no one there realized, not even Madeline, was that the house beneath their feet, the accounts funding the wine in their glasses, and the company Isaac proudly claimed, all carried a different name. Gillian Wainwright. And paperwork has a long memory. If you believe quiet strength always finds its way back to the truth. Stay with this story until the end. Before we begin, I'm curious, where are you watching from tonight? Tell me your city and your local time in the comments. And if stories about dignity, justice, and the power of patience speak to you, consider subscribing. There are many more stories like this waiting to be told. The divorce between Gillian Wainwright and Isaac Holloway was finalized on a quiet Tuesday morning in late April. There were no raised voices in the courthouse hallway, no dramatic confrontations, no bitter exchange of words that might echo later in memory. The judge signed the documents, the clerk stamped the file, and the marriage that had lasted nearly 12 years was reduced to a stack of papers bound by a thin metal clip. Gillian stood beside her attorney, Daniel Mercer, listening to the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Isaac barely looked at her. He had already begun checking his phone before the clerk finished explaining the next administrative steps. If anyone had watched closely, they might have mistaken his impatience for relief. In truth, Isaac Holloway believed something far simpler. He believed the difficult part of his life had just ended, and that the rest, his success, his reputation, his future, was finally his alone. Gillian signed the last page without hesitation. Her handwriting was steady. The name Gillian Wainwright moved smoothly across the line where it had appeared countless times before on tax returns, loan agreements, insurance forms, corporate filings, mortgage paperwork. Names, after all, had always mattered to Gillian. She understood their weight in ways Isaac never bothered to learn. Outside the courthouse, spring sunlight warmed the granite steps. Daniel Mercer closed his leather folder and turned toward her with the careful tone of a man who had spent decades watching marriages dissolve in similar quiet ways. "You're certain you're comfortable with the settlement terms?" he asked. Gillian nodded once. "I am. You're giving him a lot of operational freedom in the short term," Daniel said. Some people might have pushed harder. Gillian did not respond immediately. Across the street, a delivery truck reversed slowly its warning beep, repeating in calm, mechanical intervals. Sometimes, she said softly, people rush when they think they're winning. Daniel studied her for a moment. He had represented enough clients to recognize the difference between resignation and calculation. Gillian Wainwright did not look like someone who had surrendered. "Very well," he said. "If anything changes, you call me. I will." They shook hands, and Daniel walked toward the parking garage. Gillian remained on the steps for another minute. The courthouse doors opened and closed behind her as strangers passed by, each carrying their own private histories of promises made and broken. She took out her phone, not to call anyone. Instead, she opened a secure cloud folder. Inside it were hundreds of files, email archives, bank statements, loan documents, digital copies of corporate registrations, time-stamped correspondence stretching back nearly a decade. She did not scroll through them. She simply confirmed that the folder remained synchronized. Then she closed the app. Because Gillian had learned something long ago. The most important records rarely needed to be revisited often. They only needed to exist. 7 days later, Isaac Holloway appeared in a photograph that began circulating across several social media platforms. The photo had been taken on a private rooftop terrace overlooking the Hudson River. Isaac stood in a tailored charcoal suit, one arm around a woman with long chestnut hair and an effortless smile. String lights glowed behind them as if the evening itself had been arranged for the moment. The caption beneath the image read, "New Beginnings." The woman beside him was Madeline Carter. Madeline was 29 years old and widely known among certain lifestyle circles online. Her social media pages featured carefully framed glimpses of modern city living white kitchens, weekend brunches, travel photographs taken from hotel balconies. Her followers believed she possessed a natural ability to recognize success. Isaac Holloway at first glance looked exactly like the kind of success she admired. He owned a respected real estate investment firm. He drove a black electric sedan that suggested both wealth and restraint. He lived in a spacious colonial home in Westchester County with wide windows overlooking landscaped gardens. And now, according to the quiet buzz moving through Isaac's social network, he was newly divorced. Which meant the life Madeline had stepped into seemed both impressive and uncomplicated. What very few people noticed in the photograph was the small detail near Isaac's wrist. His watch had been a gift from Gillian 12 years earlier. He had never replaced it. Some habits survive even the most decisive endings. Inside the Westchester house, the air still carried faint traces of Gillian's presence. Not in obvious ways. Isaac had already rearranged several rooms. New artwork hung above the living room fireplace. A pair of velvet chairs replaced the older reading seats Gillian once preferred. But houses have memories that are more administrative than emotional. Certain mail continued arriving under the name Gillian Wainwright. Utility accounts still recognized her as the primary contact. Insurance policies listed her as the policyholder. These were not dramatic discoveries. They were quiet administrative details. And Isaac believed they would resolve themselves with time. Just paperwork, he told Madeline one evening as they stood in the kitchen reviewing a stack of envelopes. Madeline flipped through them casually. Mortgage statement, insurance renewal, a quarterly financial notice addressed to Holloway Property Group. She paused. Why does this one say Wainwright Holdings, LLC? Isaac didn't hesitate. That's an old filing name. Before we restructured, Madeline nodded. She had no particular reason to doubt him. After all, the house was large. The company was clearly profitable. And Isaac spoke about his work with the confidence of someone who believed his own narrative. Administrative leftovers, he said with a dismissive smile. Lawyers take forever to update everything. Madeline laughed softly. Well, she said, slipping the envelope back into the pile, I guess that's what happens when someone builds a big life. Isaac liked the way she said that. Builds a big life. The phrase settled comfortably into his thoughts. He had always preferred stories where he appeared at the center. Across town, Gillian Wainwright had moved into a smaller apartment overlooking a quiet street lined with maple trees. The space was modest compared to the Westchester house, but it was organized with the same careful order she applied to every part of her life. Her desk faced a wide window. 2 monitors glowed softly as she reviewed spreadsheets. Not the company's spreadsheets. Those she had already archived. These belonged to a consulting project she had accepted through a professional contact. Work for Gillian was not about reinvention. It was about continuity. At precisely 9:17 p.m., a notification appeared on her laptop screen. A banking alert. Not unusual. She opened the message. A routine access log. Someone had attempted to modify a financial authorization tied to one of the company's operating accounts. The request had been denied automatically. The system required confirmation from the primary account holder. Gillian Wainwright. She read the log entry carefully. Then she closed the notification without responding. There was no urgency. Systems often revealed their truths slowly. In the Westchester house, Isaac and Madeline opened a bottle of wine on the back patio. The evening air was warm. Fireflies drifted above the grass like small wandering lights. Madeline leaned against the railing, looking across the dark garden. It's beautiful here, she said. Isaac followed her gaze. "It took years to build," he replied. For a moment, the statement hung quietly between them. Because somewhere else in the state of New York, on a series of signed documents filed with the county clerk's office, the official record described the property differently. Owner of record, Gillian Wainwright. But Isaac Holloway had never been the type of man who studied paperwork closely. And sometimes the most important truths hide exactly there. In the places people assume no one is looking. Long before Isaac Holloway began introducing himself as the founder of Holloway Property Group, before the polished business cards and investor dinners and photographs in local business magazines. There had been a small apartment in Queens and a folding table that served as both dining space and office desk. In those early years, the company existed mostly as an idea Isaac repeated with conviction. "Real estate isn't complicated," he used to say. "It's about timing and confidence." Confidence Isaac possessed in abundance. Timing, however, had often depended on someone else. Gillian Wainwright never corrected him when he told the story of their success. She rarely corrected anyone about anything. But the foundation of Isaac's future had not been built from confidence alone. It had been built from paperwork. The first investment property they ever purchased had not been large or impressive. A modest duplex in Yonkers, purchased with a loan that required careful negotiation and a credit history strong enough to satisfy a cautious bank officer. Isaac's credit score at the time had been uneven. Too many late payments from earlier business attempts. Too many ambitious ventures that had collapsed before they stabilized. Gillian's record, by contrast, was immaculate. Stable employment, consistent financial history. No outstanding debt beyond her student loans, which she had been paying steadily since graduation. When the loan officer reviewed their application, the conclusion had been immediate. Mrs. Wainwright will need to be the primary borrower. Isaac had laughed it off. "Sure," he said. "Whatever gets it done." Gillian signed the documents. The loan agreement listed her as the principal borrower. The mortgage listed her as the owner. Isaac's name appeared only as an additional party. At the time, neither of them treated the distinction as meaningful. Isaac was already picturing future acquisitions, larger buildings, better neighborhoods. He believed momentum would erase the technical details. Gillian understood something quieter. Legal structures rarely disappear on their own. They simply wait. Over the next several years, Holloway Property Group slowly expanded. Another duplex, then a 4-unit building. Later, a small office property that Isaac proudly described as their first serious asset. Each acquisition required financing. Each financing process required documents. And almost every time the same pattern repeated itself. Banks preferred Gillian's financial reliability. Corporate registrations listed her as the organizing member. Lines of credit were opened under her authorization. Isaac attended meetings with investors and contractors, speaking confidently about strategy and growth. Gillian attended meetings with accountants and attorneys, reviewing liability structures, insurance coverage, and compliance filings. It was not a division of labor they ever discussed openly. It simply became the rhythm of their marriage. Isaac built the story. Gillian built the framework that allowed the story to exist. Success came slowly but steadily. The Yonkers duplex increased in value. Rental income stabilized. The company refinanced its earliest loans and used the equity to purchase larger properties. Eventually, Isaac began describing himself as a real estate developer rather than an investor. The distinction pleased him. Titles often mattered more to Isaac than the details beneath them. When they purchased the house in Westchester County 8 years later, the process followed the same pattern. Mortgage application, income verification, credit analysis. Gillian signed first. Her name appeared again as primary borrower. Isaac did not object. At that point in their lives, the arrangement seemed convenient. Their marriage appeared stable. Their business was growing. The house represented achievement. Wide windows, stone steps leading to a landscaped garden. A kitchen large enough for dinner parties Isaac enjoyed hosting. Friends who visited often complimented him. "You've done well for yourself," they would say. Isaac always accepted the praise easily. Gillian rarely corrected anyone. The first signs of strain in their marriage arrived quietly. Isaac's work required more travel. Investor meetings in Chicago, conferences in Miami, networking events that stretched late into the evening. At first, Gillian assumed the schedule was simply the cost of growth. Successful companies demanded attention. But patterns revealed themselves through repetition. Credit card statements began including unfamiliar restaurants, hotel charges that did not match Isaac's stated travel dates, small purchases in neighborhoods he claimed never to visit. None of the expenses were large enough to trigger alarm individually. Together, they formed a pattern. Gillian did not confront him immediately. Instead, she began keeping records. She downloaded monthly statements, archived email confirmations, saved copies of transaction logs from the company's financial accounts. Her professional background in compliance had taught her an important lesson. Evidence is rarely gathered during moments of anger. It is gathered quietly over time. Isaac remained unaware of her growing archive. He had always believed Gillian disliked financial details. In reality, she simply understood them better than he did. The first time Gillian heard the name, Madeline Carter, was through a passing remark from one of Isaac's colleagues. They were attending a networking reception in Manhattan. The room buzzed with conversation glasses clinking softly beneath the soft glow of pendant lights. A young marketing consultant approached Isaac and greeted him enthusiastically. "Isaac, I've been meaning to connect you with Madeline. She's fantastic with branding. You two would get along." Isaac smiled politely. "Sounds interesting," he replied. The conversation moved on quickly, but Gillian noticed something subtle. Isaac did not ask who Madeline Carter was. He already knew. The recognition passed across his face too quickly for anyone else to notice. But Gillian had spent 12 years observing Isaac Holloway. Small expressions often revealed more than words. Months passed. Isaac's late evenings became more frequent. He spoke less about the details of his work. The distance between them expanded quietly, like a crack in glass spreading slowly from a single point. One evening, Gillian sat alone at her desk, reviewing company records, when she noticed a series of transfers between internal accounts. Nothing illegal, nothing dramatic, but unusual. Funds moving briefly through intermediary accounts before returning to operating balances. A pattern that suggested temporary concealment rather than normal business activity. She exported the data, saved it to her archive, and continued working. Because Gillian had begun to suspect something Isaac himself did not fully understand. His growing confidence was beginning to outrun his control. Across town years later, Madeline Carter now walked through the Westchester house with the excitement of someone entering a carefully curated dream. She admired the tall windows, the polished wood floors, the quiet sense of success embedded in every corner. Isaac watched her with satisfaction. He liked seeing the house through her eyes. It confirmed the version of himself he preferred. "This place must have taken years to build," Madeline said, standing near the kitchen island. Isaac nodded. It did. He poured 2 glasses of wine. The evening light filtered through the windows, painting long shadows across the floor. Neither of them noticed the thin envelope sitting near the edge of the counter, a routine financial notice that had arrived earlier that afternoon. The return address belonged to the county clerk's office. Inside the envelope were updated property records filed after the finalization of Isaac and Gillian's divorce. The documents did not change the ownership of the house. They simply confirmed it. Owner of record Gillian Wainwright. But envelopes can wait patiently, and truths written in legal language often take time before they are opened. Isaac Holloway had never liked slow processes. Patience, in his view, belonged to people who lacked momentum. Deals were won by speed, by confidence, by the ability to move before hesitation had time to settle in a room. The divorce had followed that philosophy almost perfectly. When Isaac first suggested it, he did so with the same casual certainty he used when discussing new investments. "We're not happy anymore," he said one evening, standing near the kitchen island in the Westchester house. Gillian was rinsing a glass in the sink. The statement hung in the air like something rehearsed. She turned off the water and dried her hands carefully before responding. "No," she said quietly. "We're not." Isaac had expected resistance. He had expected questions, perhaps even anger. Instead, he received calm agreement. That response unsettled him more than he realized. But he recovered quickly. "I think it would be better if we kept things simple," he continued. "No drawn-out legal fight. We can divide things fairly and move on." Gillian nodded once. "Simple is fine." The conversation ended there. From Isaac's perspective, that moment confirmed what he already believed. Gillian wanted peace. She wanted distance. Most importantly, she wanted to avoid conflict. What Isaac failed to consider was that simplicity can exist on the surface, while complexity continues underneath. Within days, he had contacted a mediator recommended by a business acquaintance. The mediator specialized in cooperative divorce agreements cases, where both parties appeared willing to resolve matters quickly. Isaac framed the situation carefully. "We've grown apart," he explained during the initial consultation. "No hostility, just different directions." Across the table, Gillian said very little. The mediator, a middle-aged woman named Karen Doyle, reviewed their financial summary and nodded approvingly. "You've both accumulated significant assets during the marriage," she said. "But if cooperation continues, we can finalize everything efficiently." Efficiency pleased Isaac. He wanted the process completed before summer. There were opportunities ahead, business expansions, networking events, and other parts of his life that he preferred not to complicate with ongoing legal entanglements. During the following weeks, the settlement draft took shape. Isaac retained operational control of Holloway Property Group. He continued living in the Westchester house. The details appeared straightforward. Several financial accounts remained temporarily shared until they could be reorganized. Certain assets were scheduled for review at a later date. To Isaac, these were minor administrative steps. To Gillian, they were structural markers. She read every line carefully. Where Isaac saw routine legal language, she recognized the quiet precision of ownership, definitions, authorization rights, and deferred asset verification. When the draft agreement arrived for final signatures, Isaac skimmed it quickly. Everything looked as expected. He signed with a flourish. Gillian signed after him. Her expression revealed nothing. 2 days later, Gillian scheduled a meeting with Daniel Mercer. His office overlooked a narrow street in downtown White Plains, the windows framed by shelves filled with decades of legal volumes. Daniel listened patiently as Gillian explained the finalized agreement. "You're aware," he said carefully, "that Mr. Holloway believes he now controls the majority of the company's operations." "Yes. And you're comfortable allowing that for the moment." Gillian folded her hands on the desk. "For the moment," she said. Daniel leaned back in his chair. Some clients would prefer to resolve ownership questions immediately. Gillian shook her head slightly. Ownership doesn't change just because someone assumes it does. Daniel allowed himself a faint smile. That was precisely the answer he had expected. "You've kept your documentation every record." "Good." He opened a folder and reviewed several documents Gillian had already provided earlier in the process. Corporate registration forms, original loan agreements, mortgage filings, lines of credit. Each document contained a small but significant detail. The primary legal name tied to the company's foundational structures remained Gillian Wainwright. Daniel tapped one of the pages gently. "Mr. Holloway may discover that control and ownership are not always identical concepts." Gillian nodded. "That realization doesn't need to happen today." Daniel closed the folder. In law, he said, timing is often the quietest form of leverage. Meanwhile, Isaac was already reorganizing his life. The divorce finalized faster than he had anticipated. Within a week, the Westchester house began to feel lighter, as though a lingering tension had finally lifted. Friends congratulated him for handling the situation maturely. Business associates admired the efficiency. One evening, Isaac met Madeline Carter at a rooftop lounge in Manhattan. She wore a soft ivory jacket and spoke enthusiastically about branding projects she had recently completed. Isaac enjoyed the attention. Madeline admired success openly, without hesitation or skepticism. When she asked about his company, he described Holloway Property Group with confident ease. "We've built a strong portfolio," he said, gesturing casually with his glass. "Residential properties mostly, but we're expanding." Madeline smiled. That must take incredible discipline. Isaac accepted the compliment as if it were a natural reflection of reality. Later that night, while the city lights shimmered below them, Madeline asked a question with genuine curiosity. Was the divorce difficult? Isaac shrugged. "Not really. Gillian and I were just finished." He paused. She didn't want the stress of the business anymore. The statement felt convenient. And convenience often passes for truth when no one present knows the full story. Madeline nodded sympathetically. "Well," she said, "sometimes people outgrow each other." Isaac liked the phrase. It placed the ending neatly behind him. Across town, Gillian Wainwright sat at her apartment desk, reviewing a series of updated filings submitted through the state's online corporate registry. Nothing dramatic had changed, but subtle adjustments were appearing. Isaac had begun modifying internal authorizations inside the company's financial systems. He was attempting to centralize approval authority under his name. The requests were not malicious. They were simply incomplete. The system rejected several of them automatically. Primary authorization required confirmation from the original managing member, whereas Gillian. She did not intervene, not yet. Instead, she logged the attempts in a private spreadsheet. Date, time, requested change, system response. Documentation was a form of quiet preparation. Back in the Westchester house, Isaac opened a bottle of wine while Madeline walked slowly through the living room. She paused beside the tall windows overlooking the backyard. "It's peaceful here," she said. Isaac joined her. "Yes," he replied. "It must have taken years to create all this." Isaac followed her gaze across the garden. The stone path curved toward the far fence where small lantern lights flickered softly in the evening air. "It did," he said. He believed the statement completely, because the story he told himself had been repeated long enough to feel permanent. But elsewhere, inside county archives and financial databases and corporate records stored across several secure servers, the story existed in a different form. In those records, every foundation of the life Isaac claimed to have built carried a consistent name: Gillian Wainwright. And the quiet strength of documentation had not disappeared simply because the marriage had ended. It was still there, waiting. Madeline Carter arrived at the Westchester house on a warm Saturday afternoon in early May with 2 suitcases, a garment bag, and the quiet certainty that she was stepping into the beginning of something enviable. The driveway curved gently past trimmed hedges and a row of young maple trees before widening into a smooth stone parking area. The house itself stood with the quiet confidence of established wealth, white siding, dark shutters, tall windows that reflected the soft green of the surrounding lawn. Isaac opened the front door before she reached the steps. "You made it," he said with an easy smile. Madeline laughed softly and stepped inside. The house smelled faintly of lemon polish and fresh flowers, details that made the space feel carefully maintained. Sunlight poured through the living room windows, illuminating hardwood floors that gleamed with quiet perfection. "It's beautiful," Madeline said. She turned slowly, taking in the tall ceilings, the wide staircase, the framed photographs of properties Isaac had once proudly described as milestones of his career. "You've done incredibly well for yourself." Isaac accepted the compliment the way he accepted most praise, with relaxed confidence and no visible hesitation. "It took time," he said. Madeline placed her suitcase near the bottom of the stairs. She moved through the house with natural curiosity, pausing in the kitchen where a large marble island dominated the center of the room. Stainless steel appliances gleamed beneath recessed lighting. The windows overlooked a backyard that seemed almost deliberately serene. "This kitchen alone could convince someone to get married," she joked. Isaac smiled. Good thing you already did. Their wedding had been quiet. A small ceremony held in a private garden outside the city, attended only by a handful of friends and two of Isaac's business associates. The speed of the marriage surprised some people who knew him, but Isaac preferred efficiency in personal matters as much as in business. Madeline had not objected. To her, the suddenness felt romantic. Decisive men, she believed, rarely hesitated when they knew what they wanted. The first few days in the house passed comfortably. Madeline unpacked clothing and arranged a small workspace near the upstairs window where afternoon light filled the room. She moved several decorative items into new positions, subtly reshaping the house into something that felt like her own. Isaac watched the changes with quiet approval. The house felt livelier already. He enjoyed returning home in the evenings to find soft music playing in the kitchen or a new set of flowers arranged on the dining table. Madeline also began documenting small moments of her new life online. A photograph of morning coffee beside the tall kitchen windows. A short video of the garden just before sunset. Images carefully framed to capture a lifestyle that many of her followers admired. The captions were simple. New beginnings, grateful, home. Within hours, the posts collected thousands of likes. From the outside, the story appeared perfect. But houses maintain administrative rhythms that continue regardless of emotional transitions. 3 days after Madeline moved in, a small stack of mail arrived in the brass slot near the front door. Madeline gathered the envelopes casually as she stepped inside after an afternoon walk. Most of them were routine. Utility bills, a real estate newsletter, an advertisement from a landscaping company. Then she noticed something that made her pause. One envelope carried a familiar address, the Westchester house, but the name printed neatly above it read, Gillian Wainwright. Madeline studied the envelope for a moment. She assumed it was simply leftover mail that had not yet been redirected. When Isaac returned home that evening, she mentioned it casually while they prepared dinner. Some of Gillian's mail is still coming here, she said. Isaac glanced at the envelope briefly before placing it aside. That'll happen for a while, he replied. Change of address systems take time, Madeline nodded. That explanation sounded reasonable. Still, over the next several days, more envelopes arrived. A bank statement, a quarterly insurance notice, a document stamped with the logo of a mortgage servicing company. Each carried the same name, Gillian Wainwright. Madeline stacked them neatly near the kitchen counter, assuming Isaac would eventually forward them. But the growing pile created a subtle discomfort she could not quite explain. It was not jealousy. The divorce had been finalized. The past, she believed, had been properly closed. Yet the persistence of Gillian's name inside the house created the faint sense that some part of the story remained unfinished. One afternoon, Madeline was organizing kitchen drawers when Isaac's phone rang on the counter nearby. He answered quickly. Yeah. A male voice on the other end spoke with a slightly hurried tone of someone calling from an office environment. Isaac, it's Kevin Brooks. Quick question about the Ridgefield acquisition. Kevin Brooks worked as a project manager for Holloway Property Group. Madeline recognized the name from several conversations. Isaac leaned against the counter while listening. Sure, he said. What's up? We're finalizing the closing paperwork, Kevin continued. But the bank is asking whether Miss Wainwright needs to sign off on the authorization form. There was a short pause. Madeline looked up from the drawer she'd been organizing. Isaac's expression hardened slightly. That's not necessary, he said. I'll handle it. Right, Kevin replied. It's just that the original authorization file still lists her. As I said, I'll handle it. Isaac repeated more firmly. The call ended a moment later. Madeline watched him carefully. Everything okay? Isaac shrugged. Administrative confusion. About Gillian old records, he said quickly. Nothing important, Madeline. He accepted the answer. But the way Isaac had ended the conversation stayed with her. was not the tone of a man correcting a minor mistake. It sounded more like someone closing a door. Later that evening, while Isaac worked in his office reviewing property reports, Madeline returned to the kitchen to prepare tea. The stack of mail still rested on the counter. She lifted the top envelope again. Mortgage statement. The return address belonged to a large national lending institution. Madeline did not open the envelope. She had no intention of invading someone else's privacy. But she studied the name printed clearly across the front, Gillian Wainwright. A quiet thought crossed her mind. If Gillian's name remained on so many documents, why had Isaac never mentioned needing to update them? Divorce settlements usually included steps like that. Transfers, refinancing, ownership adjustments. Madeline had never been through a divorce herself, but she had watched friends navigate similar processes. Paperwork changed, names shifted. Yet, here inside the house, Isaac described as fully his, the official correspondence, still told a slightly different story. She set the envelope back onto the stack. For the moment, the question did not feel urgent enough to pursue. Still, the thought lingered quietly in the back of her mind. Upstairs, Isaac closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair. The Ridgefield acquisition should have been simple. Instead, the bank's compliance team had flagged a detail inside the company's authorization records. Primary member Gillian Wainwright. Isaac had expected the divorce settlement to resolve matters like that automatically. Apparently, the change required additional documentation. He made a mental note to contact the bank's legal department the following week. Administrative leftovers, he reminded himself. Nothing more. Downstairs, Madeline turned off the kitchen lights and looked out through the wide windows into the dark garden. The house stood quietly around her. Comfortable, impressive, a life many people would admire. Yet, somewhere within the quiet structure of its paperwork, a different reality remained recorded. One that neither Isaac nor Madeline had fully examined. And sometimes the truth begins not with confrontation, but with a name that refuses to disappear from the mail. The first time Madeline Carter called the bank, she did not expect the conversation to become memorable. She had been sorting through the week's mail at the kitchen island late Monday morning, while Isaac was already at the office. Sunlight stretched across the marble surface, illuminating the familiar stack of envelopes that seemed to arrive every few days. Most of them she ignored. Advertisements, property newsletters, routine statements. But the mortgage envelope appeared again. And again the name printed above the address read Gillian Wainwright. Madeline turned the envelope slowly between her fingers. The house around her was quiet, except for the distant hum of the refrigerator. She knew it was not technically her responsibility. But she also knew that living in a house meant understanding the small practical details that kept it running. So she did what many people would do. She called the number printed on the envelope. After several automated prompts and a brief hold, a customer service representative answered. "Thank you for calling Northeastern Home Lending. This is Rachel speaking. How can I assist you today?" Madeline hesitated only briefly. "Hi," she said politely. "I'm calling about a mortgage statement that was delivered to our address. I believe it's still under the name of the previous resident." "Of course," Rachel replied. "Can I have the property address?" Madeline read it aloud. There was a pause while the representative typed. Then Rachel spoke again. "Thank you. And may I ask your name?" "Madeline Carter." Another pause. Rachel's tone remained friendly, but it shifted slightly into the careful cadence of someone reading official information. "I'm sorry, Miss Carter, but for security reasons, I can only discuss mortgage details with the account holder." Madeline expected that. "Yes, I understand. I'm just trying to make sure the statement reaches the right person. The previous owner moved out after a divorce." Rachel typed again. "Well," she said after a moment, "according to our records, the account holder has not changed." Madeline frowned slightly. "I think you may be looking at older information. The house belongs to Isaac Holloway now." Another pause. Longer this time. Rachel's voice returned measured and precise. "Our records indicate that the primary borrower and property owner remains Gillian Wainwright." Madeline did not speak for several seconds. She looked around the kitchen as if the walls themselves might respond. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "Could you repeat that? The property owner on file is Gillian Wainwright." Madeline felt a small tightening in her chest. "That doesn't sound right," she said carefully. "Her divorce from Isaac Holloway was finalized recently." "Yes, ma'am. But we have not received any documentation changing the mortgage holder." Madeline nodded slowly, even though the representative could not see her. "Thank you," she said. "I appreciate the information." She ended the call. The kitchen seemed unusually quiet afterward. Not alarming, just quiet. Madeline placed the envelope back on the counter and stood there for a long moment. It was possible she told herself that the bank simply had not processed the updates yet. Divorce paperwork often took time to move through financial institutions. Still, the clarity of Rachel's answer lingered. Primary borrower and property owner, Gillian Wainwright. Across town, Gillian sat at her desk reviewing a series of routine compliance reports for a consulting client. The apartment windows were open slightly, allowing the soft sound of afternoon traffic to drift inside. At exactly 1:14 p.m., her phone vibrated. A banking alert. She glanced down. The message displayed a familiar format from one of the company's financial institutions. Unauthorized modification attempt detected. The request had been blocked automatically. Gillian opened the notification. The log showed that someone had attempted to change the authorization structure for one of Holloway Property Group's operating accounts. The system required approval from the managing member, Gillian Wainwright. The request had been denied. Gillian closed the notification. She did not contact the bank. She did not call Daniel Mercer. Instead, she opened a small spreadsheet stored inside a secure folder. The file contained a growing list of similar entries. Authorization change request. Date, time, system response. Quiet patterns forming over weeks. She added the newest entry and saved the file. Then she returned to her work. Because Gillian had learned something important during her years in compliance. Systems rarely reveal their weaknesses immediately, but they record everything. Later that evening, Isaac returned home slightly later than usual. Madeline was sitting at the kitchen island, scrolling through her phone when he walked in. "How was your day?" he asked, loosening his tie. "Good," she replied. Her tone was normal, perhaps a little more thoughtful than usual. Isaac poured himself a glass of water and leaned against the counter. Madeline watched him for a moment. Then she spoke casually. "I called the mortgage company today." Isaac looked up. "Why, I wanted to ask about the statement still arriving under Gillian's name." Isaac's expression tightened briefly before smoothing again, and Madeline hesitated. "They said the account is still listed under her?" Isaac laughed lightly. "That's normal." Madeline studied him. "They said she's the primary borrower." Isaac took a sip of water. Banks are slow updating records. Madeline waited. "Is the mortgage being refinanced?" she asked. Isaac shrugged. "We'll handle it eventually." His answer sounded relaxed, but his shoulders had grown slightly tense. Madeline noticed the change, though she did not comment on it. "Okay," she said. The conversation drifted into other topics. Dinner plans. An event Isaac planned to attend the following week. Madeline let the subject rest. But the quiet certainty she had felt about the house earlier that month had shifted slightly. Not shattered, just adjusted, like a picture frame nudged a few degrees out of alignment. 2 days later, another letter arrived. This one carried the logo of the homeowner's insurance provider. Madeline recognized the company immediately. She opened the envelope without thinking. Inside was a renewal notice. Policyholder Gillian Wainwright. Named insured property owner Gillian Wainwright. Madeline read the document twice. Then she folded it carefully and placed it back inside the envelope. That evening, when Isaac returned home, she handed it to him. "This one probably needs updating too." Isaac glanced at the page. For a brief moment, something unreadable crossed his face. Then he nodded. "I'll take care of it." Madeline watched him set the letter aside. She did not push further. But the pattern had become difficult to ignore. Mortgage, insurance, authorization logs inside the company's financial systems, all pointing quietly in the same direction, back toward a name that was supposed to belong only to the past. Gillian Wainwright. Later that night, Isaac sat alone in his office reviewing company accounts. Several transactions required approval. Normally, he processed them quickly. But tonight, the system prompted an additional verification. Authorization pending managing member confirmation required. Isaac exhaled sharply. He knew exactly what that meant. Somewhere within the corporate registration files submitted years earlier, Gillian still held the formal position of managing member. The divorce settlement had not changed that structure. Not yet. Isaac leaned back in his chair. Administrative delay, he told himself. Nothing more. These things simply required paperwork. Still, the system's quiet refusal lingered on the screen. A reminder that ownership is not determined by confidence. It is determined by records. And records tend to remember everything. Holloway Property Group had grown slowly enough that many people forgot how small it once was. From the outside, the company now looked established. Its website displayed polished photographs of renovated properties, neatly trimmed apartment complexes, and a modest office building in Stamford that Isaac often described as the firm's cornerstone investment. But businesses rarely exist only in the photographs they show the world. Behind the public image was a network of accounts filings and authorization structures built years earlier, when the company had needed stability more than appearance. And most of those structures had been built by Gillian Wainwright. Isaac had never studied them closely. He had been busy doing the visible work, meeting investors, negotiating purchase prices, walking through buildings with contractors and real estate agents. Gillian had done the quiet work. She registered the company with the state. She opened the first corporate bank account. She structured the liability protections that separated personal assets from business obligations. She filed the annual reports. She created the authorization hierarchy that allowed different employees to access funds while protecting the core accounts from unauthorized changes. At the time, Isaac had considered those steps technical details, necessary but temporary. Success, he believed, would eventually make the early paperwork irrelevant. Years later, the paperwork remained. Isaac arrived at the company office early Wednesday morning. The building itself sat along a busy commercial street in White Plains, a modest two-story structure that housed several small firms. Holloway Property Group occupied the second floor. Inside, the office felt energetic but controlled. Desks arranged neatly, large monitors displaying property management dashboards, phone calls drifting through the open workspace. Employees nodded politely when Isaac walked in. He enjoyed these small acknowledgments. They reinforced the image he carried of himself as the company's center. Morning, Isaac said Angela Ruiz from behind her glass office door. Angela served as the company's financial controller. She had joined Holloway Property Group 6 years earlier, when the portfolio had grown large enough to require professional accounting oversight. Angela respected Isaac's ambition. But she respected Gillian's systems. Morning, Isaac replied, stepping inside her office. Angela turned her monitor slightly so he could see. I wanted to go over something with you before the Ridgefield closing. Isaac sighed quietly. Kevin mentioned something about paperwork. Angela nodded. The bank flagged the authorization file. Isaac folded his arms. What does that mean? Angela pointed to the screen. The company's master account authorization still lists Gillian Wainwright as the managing member. Isaac waved his hand dismissively. She's not involved anymore. Angela remained calm. I understand that, but the bank's compliance department requires confirmation from the listed managing member before they finalize the loan disbursement. Isaac frowned. That's ridiculous. Angela shook her head slightly. It's standard procedure. She opened another file. Most of the company's original financial structures were registered under her authority. Isaac's irritation sharpened. Because of credit requirements back then. That doesn't mean she runs the company. Angela did not argue, but she also did not move past the issue. The bank won't release funds until the authorization file is updated. Isaac leaned forward. Then update it. Angela met his gaze calmly. It requires her signature. For a moment, the room was quiet. Isaac straightened. We'll handle it later. Angela nodded once. That's fine. But until then, the Ridgefield purchase may be delayed. Isaac left the office without replying. Across the workspace, Kevin Brooks watched Isaac walk toward his private office with a slightly tense expression. Kevin had worked with Holloway Property Group long enough to understand the company's internal structure better than most employees. He also remembered who had designed it. Gillian Wainwright. When Kevin first joined the company years earlier, Gillian had spent nearly a full week explaining the firm's financial systems to him. Not with the impatience many executives displayed, with careful clarity. She had walked him through the authorization hierarchy, the internal safeguards, and the procedures designed to protect the company from impulsive financial decisions. Kevin remembered one sentence particularly well. Businesses don't collapse because of one bad idea, she had told him. They collapse when no one slows down long enough to check the details. Kevin suspected that principle had saved Holloway Property Group more than once. Now, watching Isaac close the door of his office sharply, Kevin wondered whether those safeguards were about to become important again. That evening, Madeline sat in the living room, scrolling through messages from her followers. Her recent photos of the house had generated enthusiastic responses. Dream home, you're living the life, manifesting this energy. Madeline smiled softly as she read them. Part of her genuinely enjoyed sharing moments of beauty, but another part of her had begun noticing small inconsistencies inside the life those photographs captured. The mail, the mortgage conversation, the insurance policy, each detail alone had seemed insignificant. Together they formed a faint pattern. Isaac entered the room, carrying 2 glasses of wine. Long day, Madeline asked. Just business headaches? He handed her a glass. Madeline studied him for a moment. You seem stressed lately. Isaac shrugged, banks moving slowly. Paperwork nonsense. Madeline tilted her head slightly, still about the mortgage. Partly. He sat beside her. Corporate stuff, too. Madeline hesitated before speaking again. Does Gillian still have any role in the company? Isaac laughed lightly. No. Then why does her name keep appearing on everything? Isaac took a sip of wine. Old records. Madeline watched him carefully. You'll change them soon. Course. His answer came quickly, perhaps too quickly. Madeline nodded. She did not challenge him. But the quiet certainty she once felt about the house, the company, and Isaac's control over both had begun shifting slowly. Not collapsing, just moving, like a floor that suddenly feels less solid underfoot. Later that night, while Madeline slept upstairs, Isaac returned to his office inside the house. The desk lamp cast a narrow pool of light across his laptop. He logged into the company's banking portal again. Several transactions remained pending. Authorization required managing member confirmation. The same message from earlier in the day. Isaac opened the corporate registration file stored in the company's digital archive. The document dated back nearly a decade. Organizing member Gillian Wainwright. Managing member Gillian Wainwright. Isaac exhaled slowly. He had always assumed these details would change automatically when circumstances changed. Divorce, separation, new life. But documents did not update themselves. And the systems Gillian had designed years earlier were doing exactly what they were built to do. Protect the company. Even if that protection now stood quietly between Isaac's and the control he believed was already his. Outside the office window, the Westchester neighborhood remained peaceful and still. Inside the company's financial systems, however, something far less visible was beginning to take shape. A slow realization that ownership, once written into official records, does not disappear simply because someone stops looking at the paperwork. Madeline Carter had always considered herself observant. not suspicious, just attentive to small details that others overlooked. It was a habit that had helped her build an online audience. The best lifestyle posts, she often said, came from noticing the quiet textures of daily life. How sunlight touched a table in the morning, how a room changed color in the evening. Now, living inside the Westchester house, that same attentiveness was beginning to focus on something less aesthetic. Paperwork. At first, the details had seemed harmless. A few envelopes with Gillian Wainwright's name, a mortgage account that hadn't yet updated, insurance notices that still referenced the former owner. Each explanation Isaac offered sounded reasonable on its own. But patterns have a way of emerging when the same explanation appears too many times. It began again one afternoon when Madeline stopped by the company office to drop off lunch for Isaac. The building in White Plains felt more functional than the carefully curated spaces Madeline usually photographed. Muted gray carpet, fluorescent lighting, employees working quietly behind computer screens. A receptionist directed her toward Isaac's office, but as Madeline passed through the open workspace, she overheard a conversation between Kevin Brooks and Angela Ruiz. They were speaking quietly, but certain words carried across the room. Bank still waiting for confirmation. Angela's voice sounded calm but firm. Without her authorization, the account structure can't change. Kevin lowered his voice further. I thought Isaac said the divorce settled that. Angela paused before replying. Divorce and corporate filings are two different things. Madeline slowed slightly as she walked past. Neither Kevin nor Angela noticed her. Until Gillian signs off, Angela continued, the system won't update. Madeline kept walking. But the sentence lingered until Gillian signs off. Isaac looked up from his desk when Madeline entered. You're a lifesaver, he said, smiling as she placed the lunch container beside his laptop. Figured you might forget to eat. He stood and stretched. Busy day, Madeline nodded. Just errands. She glanced briefly toward the glass walls of the office. Your team seems focused. Isaac followed her gaze. They're good people. Madeline hesitated. I heard Angela talking about something with the bank. Isaac's shoulders stiffened almost imperceptibly. Routine paperwork. Something about needing Gillian's authorization. Isaac waved his hand dismissively. Temporary issue. Madeline studied his expression. Temporary, how Isaac leaned against his desk. The company was structured years ago when our finances were different. Some of the authorization layers haven't been updated yet. Madeline nodded slowly. And that requires her signature for now. Will that be a problem? Isaac shook his head quickly. No. He said the word with confident certainty. But Madeline noticed something she had begun recognizing more frequently in recent weeks. Isaac's answers were becoming shorter whenever Gillian's name appeared in the conversation. Later that afternoon, Madeline walked back toward the parking lot. Kevin Brooks happened to be standing near the elevator reviewing a document on his tablet. He looked up and smiled politely. Madeline, right? Yes, nice to meet you properly. Kevin Brooks. They shook hands. Madeline hesitated for a moment before asking a question that sounded casual enough. You've worked with Isaac for a while. Almost 7 years. That's impressive. Kevin smiled. It's been an interesting company to watch grow. Madeline tilted her head slightly. Did you know Gillian too? Kevin paused briefly. Of course. How involved was she with the business? Kevin seemed genuinely surprised by the question. She built most of the internal systems. Madeline blinked. I thought Isaac started everything. He did, Kevin said carefully. But Gillian handled the structure. He gestured vaguely as if indicating invisible machinery beneath the office. Financial architecture, compliance, corporate filings, that sort of thing. Madeline nodded thoughtfully. She sounds organized. Kevin laughed softly. That's one way to put it. Madeline waited. Kevin continued. When I joined the company, she spent days walking me through the authorization safeguards. Safeguards? Kevin nodded. Controls designed to prevent anyone from making large financial changes without proper oversight. Madeline felt a quiet shift inside her understanding. Even Isaac Kevin smiled politely, especially Isaac. The comment sounded half joking, but the sincerity beneath it was unmistakable. That evening, Madeline sat on the patio behind the house, while twilight slowly softened the edges of the garden. The air smelled faintly of damp grass and flowering shrubs. Isaac joined her with 2 glasses of wine. "Perfect night," he said. Madeline accepted the glass. "Yes." For a while, they sat quietly. Then Madeline spoke. "Kevin said something interesting today." Isaac glanced at her. "What's that?" He said Gillian designed most of the company's financial systems. Isaac chuckled lightly. "She handled paperwork." That's not how he described it. Isaac leaned back in his chair. "People exaggerate." Madeline turned her glass slowly between her fingers. "She also created safeguards." Isaac's smile faded slightly. "What kind of safeguards controls that require oversight before major financial changes?" Isaac's tone grew sharper. "Standard corporate procedures." Madeline met his eyes. "Even for you?" Isaac did not answer immediately. Instead, he took a slow sip of wine. "You're overthinking this." Madeline studied his face. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps the systems Kevin described were simply technical details. But the more she learned about the company's structure, the more one fact kept returning to the surface. Gillian's name remained attached to nearly everything important. Across the city, Gillian Wainwright closed her laptop after finishing a long compliance report. She walked to the window of her apartment and looked out at the quiet street below. Her phone vibrated once again. Another automated banking notification. Authorization modification attempt denied. She opened the log entry. Same account, same request. The system still required confirmation from the managing member. Gillian Wainwright. She added the new entry to her spreadsheet. The list had grown steadily. Small attempts, quiet rejections, each one recorded. Documentation building patiently. Gillian saved the file and closed her computer. She did not feel anger, not even satisfaction. Only the steady calm that came from understanding how systems worked. Because the safeguards she had created years earlier were doing exactly what they had always been designed to do. They were slowing things down, long enough for the truth to become visible. Back in Westchester, Madeline looked up at the house illuminated by warm interior lights. From the outside, it still looked exactly like the life she had imagined. Beautiful, successful, secure. But inside the structure of the company, the mortgage, the insurance policies, and the financial systems beneath it all, another reality remained quietly intact. A framework built by someone who understood the power of records. And the records were beginning to speak, even if no one yet wanted to hear them. The first legal notice arrived on a gray Thursday morning, folded neatly inside a thick envelope that looked more formal than the usual mail. Madeline found it in the brass slot beside the front door when she returned from a morning walk. The envelope was heavier than most. The return address carried the name of a law firm she did not recognize. Mercer and Hale. Legal Services. Madeline placed the envelope on the kitchen counter and stared at it for a moment. The name printed beneath the address read Isaac Holloway. Below that, in smaller type, Holloway Property Group. Madeline hesitated. It was clearly addressed to Isaac, so she did not open it. But the tone of the envelope itself, the thick paper, the official seal, made her uneasy. She'd left it on the counter. When Isaac returned home that evening, he noticed the envelope immediately. "What's this?" he asked. "Came in the mail this morning." Madeline watched him carefully as he turned it over. The moment Isaac read the return address, something in his posture changed. Subtle, but unmistakable. He opened the envelope slowly. Inside were several pages of formal legal language printed on crisp white paper. Madeline could see only fragments as Isaac scanned the first page. Preservation notice. Financial documentation. Records retention requirement. Isaac's jaw tightened. "What is it?" Madeline asked. Isaac exhaled through his nose. Nothing major. But he continued reading. The document came from Daniel Mercer's office. Madeline noticed the name near the bottom of the page. Daniel Mercer. Something about that name sounded faintly familiar. Then she remembered. It had appeared on one of the divorce documents Isaac signed months earlier. Is it about Gillian? She asked quietly. Isaac folded the papers and placed them back inside the envelope. It's just legal housekeeping. Madeline frowned slightly. What kind of housekeeping? Isaac hesitated before answering. Standard notification regarding financial documentation. That sounds serious. It's not. His tone was firm enough to end the conversation, but the tension in his voice lingered long after he left the kitchen. The next morning, Isaac arrived at the office earlier than usual. Angela Ruiz was already there reviewing financial reports. He placed the envelope on her desk. Have you seen this? Angela adjusted her glasses and read the first page carefully. Her expression remained neutral. This is a preservation notice. Isaac crossed his arms. Explain. Angela continued reading before answering. It requires the company to retain all financial records related to certain accounts and transactions. Why, Angela flipped to the second page. It appears to be related to asset verification following the divorce settlement. Isaac's voice sharpened. That settlement is finalized. Angela nodded calmly. Yes. Then why is her lawyer involved? Angela placed the pages neatly back inside the envelope. Because certain ownership questions may still exist. Isaac stared at her. There are no ownership questions. Angela did not argue, but she spoke carefully. Isaac, many of the company's core financial structures are still legally connected to Gillian. That's temporary, possibly. Angela met his gaze. But until those structures are formally changed, the legal connection remains. Isaac picked up the envelope again. This is ridiculous. Angela leaned back slightly in her chair. Preservation notices are common when lawyers want to ensure documentation isn't altered or deleted. Isaac frowned. You think she's planning something? Angela considered the question before responding. I think her lawyer's making sure every record stays intact. Isaac said nothing. Across the office floor, Kevin Brooks watched the exchange from his desk. He had not read the letter, but he had seen the envelope, and he recognized the name Mercer and Hale. Kevin remembered Gillian mentioning Daniel Mercer years ago during a conversation about corporate safeguards. He's very careful, she had said. Kevin suspected careful lawyers rarely sent letters without purpose. That evening, Madeline sat at the kitchen island while Isaac paced slowly across the living room. He had read the notice twice already. The language was precise. All financial records related to Holloway Property Group must be preserved. No deletion, no modification, no restructuring of authorization files without formal documentation. Madeline watched him silently for several minutes. Is this about the business? She asked. Isaac stopped pacing. Yes. What kind of issue requires a legal notice, compliance verification? Madeline leaned forward slightly. Isaac, he looked at her. You've said several times that Gillian has no involvement anymore. That's correct. Then why would her lawyer send something like this? Isaac's patience began to thin. Because lawyers like paperwork. Madeline did not smile. That answer doesn't make sense. Isaac turned away. Everything is under control. Madeline studied his back as he walked toward the office. For the first time since moving into the house, she felt something unfamiliar. Not doubt exactly, but a quiet awareness that the version of events she had accepted might not include every detail. Across the city, Gillian Wainwright sat across from Daniel Mercer in his office. The afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows, casting soft light across the desk between them. Daniel reviewed a thick folder. Preservation notice has been delivered, he said. Gillian nodded. And Isaac, I imagine he's reading it carefully. Daniel opened another document. The next step depends on what we find in the financial records. Gillian folded her hands calmly. I'm not interested in confrontation. Daniel smiled faintly. Most legal outcomes don't require confrontation. He tapped the folder gently. They required documentation. Inside the folder were hundreds of pages. Bank statements, authorization logs, corporate filings, transaction histories, all carefully organized. Daniel looked up. If Mr. Holloway has been attempting to modify authorization structures without proper ownership authority, they'll become visible. Gillian's voice remained steady. I assumed it would. Daniel closed the folder. Paper trails are patient things. Gillian nodded. I know. Later that night, Isaac sat alone in his office again. The legal notice lay open on his desk. Outside the window, the quiet Westchester neighborhood remained peaceful, unaware of the slow legal process beginning to unfold inside the house. Isaac read one line again. All relevant financial documentation must be preserved for review. No alterations permitted. The words felt heavier the second time, because Isaac understood something he had not considered carefully before. The systems Gillian had built over the years recorded everything. Every authorization attempt, every transaction, every internal modification request. If those records were examined closely, they would reveal exactly who controlled what, and exactly who didn't. Isaac leaned back in his chair. For the first time since the divorce, he felt a small, unfamiliar sensation creeping into his thoughts. Uncertainty. Not dramatic fear. Just the quiet realization that the story he believed about his own success might be more complicated than he had assumed. And somewhere inside thousands of pages of financial documentation, the truth about Holloway Property Group was waiting to be read. Email rarely announces its importance when it arrives. It appears quietly, one message among dozens, waiting patiently in a digital inbox until someone chooses to open it. For years, Gillian Wainwright had treated email as both communication and record. In her work within financial compliance, she had learned that conversations written down often carried more weight than conversations spoken aloud. People forget what they say. Systems rarely forget what they store. On a calm Monday morning, Gillian sat at her apartment desk reviewing an archive she had not opened in months. Her laptop screen displayed a long list of email threads organized by date. Most of them came from the early years of Holloway Property Group. Subject lines about loan applications, property inspections, vendor contracts, the ordinary infrastructure of a growing business. But Daniel Mercer had asked her to locate something specific, any written communication that might clarify how ownership and authority had been understood inside the company. So Gillian searched for Isaac's name. Hundreds of results appeared. She began reading carefully. Across town, Isaac Holloway started the morning believing the legal notice would fade into background noise. Lawyers sent letters all the time. Most of them never led anywhere. Still, the presence of Daniel Mercer's name in the situation made him uneasy. Mercer had been involved during the divorce settlement. He was known for moving slowly and documenting everything. Isaac sat at his desk inside the company office, scrolling through financial dashboards, while Angela Ruiz reviewed quarterly reports nearby. The Ridgefield acquisition still had not closed. The bank continued requesting confirmation from the company's listed managing member, Gillian Wainwright. Isaac had not contacted her. He had no intention of doing so. The company was his. Everyone knew that. Years of work had built the portfolio. Years of deals had expanded it. Technical paperwork could not erase that reality. At least, that was the version of the story Isaac preferred. Late that afternoon, an email arrived in Angela Ruiz's inbox. Subject line, documentation request, Holloway Property Group. The sender address belonged to Mercer and Hale Legal Services. Angela opened the message. The request was concise. Their office required copies of several internal communications regarding the company's financial structure and authorization procedures. Specifically, any correspondence referencing managing member authority. Angela leaned back in her chair. She had expected something like this. The preservation notice meant documentation requests would follow. She walked into Isaac's office. "You should see this," she said. Isaac glanced up. What now? Angela handed him a printed copy of the email. Isaac read the request quickly, They're asking for internal emails, yes. For what purpose? Angela answered calmly. To verify how the company's authority structure has been understood over time. Isaac's voice sharpened. They're phishing. Angela remained composed. Or confirming. Isaac tossed the paper onto his desk. They won't find anything. Angela did not respond immediately. Instead, she opened the company's internal email archive system. Let's be certain. Several minutes later, Angela located an older thread dated 8 years earlier. The subject line read, Corporate Authorization Structure Initial Setup. Angela opened it. The conversation included Isaac Gillian and the bank officer who had helped establish the company's first major line of credit. She read the message slowly, then she printed it. Isaac watched impatiently. Well. Angela placed the page in front of him. The message came from Isaac himself. It had been written during the early days of the company, when the bank required clarity about who controlled the accounts. Isaac read the line twice. If it simplifies the process, we'll list Gillian as managing member and primary authority. I trust her judgment completely when it comes to financial oversight. Angela waited quietly. Isaac exhaled. That was years ago. Angela nodded. Yes, but it establishes the structure. Isaac rubbed his forehead. That doesn't mean she owns the company. Angela's voice remained careful. It means the company's financial authority was formally placed under her oversight. Isaac stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. Angela did not raise her voice. But it is documented. Across the city, Gillian continued reading through her own archive. She paused when she found the same email thread. She remembered the conversation clearly. The bank had insisted on one managing member responsible for financial compliance. Isaac had suggested her name without hesitation. At the time, it had felt like trust, or perhaps convenience. Gillian forwarded the email to Daniel Mercer. Within minutes, he replied, "This will be useful." Gillian closed the message and returned to her search. Another thread appeared from 6 years earlier. Subject line, Authorization Limits Internal Policy. She opened it. Isaac had written to several employees explaining why large financial changes required Gillian's approval. Gillian built the system to prevent reckless decisions, the email read. If you need major authorization, it goes through her first. Gillian read the sentence calmly. She did not smile. She simply forwarded the message to Daniel Mercer. That evening, Madeline Carter sat alone in the living room, scrolling through messages from friends. Several people had commented on her recent photos of the house. You look so happy. What a beautiful life. Madeline set her phone aside. She was happy, mostly. But the quiet tension she sensed around Isaac lately had not disappeared. When he entered the room, she noticed the tightness in his expression immediately. Long day, she asked. Isaac nodded. Lawyers asking questions. About the company, yes. Madeline hesitated before asking the next question. About Gillian. Isaac sat down across from her. They're reviewing old documentation. Why? Because her lawyer wants to confirm things. Madeline studied his face. Confirm what? Isaac looked away briefly. Technical details. Madeline waited. What kind of details? Isaac sighed. Authorization structures. Madeline leaned forward slightly, meaning Isaac hesitated. Then he said something he had avoided saying aloud, until now. Some of the early financial authority was registered under her name. Madeline blinked. How much authority? Isaac did not answer immediately. Enough to require her signature for certain updates. Madeline felt the quiet shift again. The same one that had begun weeks earlier. What kind of updates? Isaac rubbed the back of his neck. Major financial changes. Madeline's voice remained calm. Like what? Isaac met her eyes. Like restructuring accounts. Madeline absorbed the information slowly. And that's what the lawyers are reviewing, yes. She sat back in her chair. For the first time since moving into the house, the structure of Isaac's story felt incomplete. Not false, but unfinished. Because somewhere inside thousands of archived emails, a different narrative had begun to emerge. One written in Isaac's own words. A record that described Gillian Wainwright not as a quiet participant in the company's past, but as the person he had trusted to control its foundation. And now those words were being read again. Bank records are quiet witnesses. They do not argue. They do not exaggerate. They simply record the movement of money line by line, date by date, without concern for the explanations people later attached to those numbers. Daniel Mercer understood that better than most attorneys. By the time he scheduled the next meeting with Gillian Wainwright, several thick folders already sat neatly arranged across the conference table in his office. Each folder contained financial records obtained through standard legal requests. Account statements, transaction histories, authorization logs, patterns waiting to be interpreted. Gillian arrived just after 9 in the morning. She carried a single notebook and placed it on the table beside the folders. Daniel greeted her with the quiet professionalism he always maintained. "Thank you for coming." Gillian nodded. "Have you found something?" Daniel opened the first folder. "Several things." He slid a set of bank statements toward her. "These are operating accounts connected to Holloway Property Group." Gillian glanced down. The statements covered a period beginning nearly a year before the divorce. Daniel tapped one section with his pen. "Take a look at the withdrawal patterns." Gillian studied the entries carefully. Small transfers appeared repeatedly. Not dramatic sums, but frequent. Funds moving from the company's primary account into secondary accounts, and then returning days later. Temporary diversions. Gillian looked up. He was moving money. "Yes," Daniel said. Why, Daniel opened another folder. Some of the transfers align with personal expenditures. He slid forward a credit card statement linked to Isaac. Madeline Carter's name appeared beside several restaurant reservations. Luxury hotels, travel charges, dates that occurred months before the divorce had been filed. Gillian read the pages without visible reaction. Daniel continued. "These expenditures were paid indirectly through company funds. That's not legal. It's questionable at best." Daniel leaned back in his chair. "The issue becomes more serious because of how the accounts were structured." Gillian understood immediately. "My authorization." Daniel nodded. "Exactly. The operating accounts were legally tied to her as managing member. That meant certain transactions technically occurred under her financial oversight, even if she had not approved them." Daniel flipped to another document. These entries also coincide with several attempts Isaac made to modify account permissions. Gillian examined the log. Multiple authorization requests. Denied. System response managing member confirmation required. Her name appeared repeatedly. Gillian Wainwright. Across town, Isaac Holloway sat in Angela Ruiz's office, reviewing the same bank records. The atmosphere in the room felt noticeably heavier than it had in previous meetings. Angela kept her voice calm. "These transfers will raise questions." Isaac frowned. "They're temporary movements." Angela nodded. "But they involve company funds used for personal expenses." Isaac waved his hand dismissively. "Executives do that all the time." Angela chose her words carefully. "Not when the account authority belongs to someone else." Isaac looked up sharply. "I run the company." Angela did not disagree, but she did not confirm it either. "Legally," she said slowly, "the operating accounts are still tied to Gillian's authorization structure." Isaac leaned forward. "You're saying she could challenge these transactions?" Angela paused. "It's possible." Isaac rubbed his temples. "This is ridiculous." Angela slid another page toward him. Some of the transfers occurred during the period before the divorce filing. Isaac stared at the statement. One line in particular stood out. A payment to a boutique hotel in Manhattan. The date matched a weekend he had told Gillian he was attending a real estate conference. Angela watched him carefully. "These records are objective." Isaac's voice grew defensive. "They don't explain context." No, Angela agreed. "But they show patterns." Isaac stood abruptly. "I'm not discussing my personal life with accountants." Angela remained seated. "This isn't about your personal life." She tapped the page. It's about financial responsibility. Back in Daniel Mercer's office, Gillian closed the final folder. The bank statements had revealed more than she expected, but not more than she had suspected. Daniel folded his hands. These records tell a clear story. Gillian looked at him calmly. Isaac used company funds. Yes, without authorization. Yes. Daniel paused, and he attempted to modify the account structures afterward. Gillian nodded slowly. So the system blocked him. Exactly. Daniel leaned forward slightly. That system was designed by you. Gillian did not respond immediately. She had built those safeguards years earlier for a simple reason. Isaac moved quickly. Too quickly sometimes. The company needed mechanisms that slowed major financial decisions long enough for someone to review them. At the time, she had believed that person would always be her. She had not imagined the safeguards might someday protect the company from Isaac himself. Daniel opened another document. This timeline will be important. He pointed to several highlighted entries. The personal expenditures coincide with the period when Isaac began seeing Madeline Carter. Gillian said nothing. Daniel studied her for a moment. Does that surprise you, no? Her voice remained steady. Why not? Gillian closed her notebook. Because patterns rarely appear suddenly. Daniel nodded slowly. That's true. That evening, Madeline Carter sat on the patio again, watching the last light fade across the garden. Isaac joined her with a glass of wine. He looked tired. Rough day, she asked. Isaac sat down heavily, lawyers digging through financial records. Madeline tilted her head. Why? Isaac hesitated. Because Gillian's attorney wants to verify certain transactions. Madeline frowned. What transactions? Isaac exhaled. Routine business transfers. Madeline studied him. And they're a problem. They're being interpreted that way. Madeline waited. Isaac continued. They're questioning whether company funds were used for personal expenses. Madeline felt a small tightening in her chest. Were they? Isaac looked away. It's complicated. Madeline's voice remained quiet. Isaac. He did not answer. The silence stretched between them. Madeline stared out at the dark garden. The house behind them still looked exactly like the life she had imagined. But somewhere inside the quiet systems that supported it, bank accounts, authorization logs, financial records, another version of the story was forming. A version written not by Isaac's confidence, but by the numbers themselves. And numbers have a way of telling their truth slowly, line by line, statement by statement, until the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. The recording was not dramatic. It did not arrive with shouting voices or a moment designed for spectacle. Instead, like most important pieces of evidence, it appeared quietly discovered, not because someone was looking for drama, but because someone had been careful enough to keep everything. Daniel Mercer found it while reviewing an older set of archived files Gillian had forwarded earlier that week. The audio file had been attached to an email thread dated nearly 3 years before the divorce. At first, Daniel assumed it was a routine voicemail attachment, but the subject line caught his attention. Isaac, you might want to hear this. The message had originally been sent to Gillian by a former property manager who had worked briefly with Holloway Property Group. Daniel downloaded the file. He pressed play. The recording lasted just under 2 minutes. Isaac's voice filled the office speakers with familiar confidence. Nah, I'm telling you, the paperwork is in Gillian's name because the banks insisted on it back then. It's just a technical thing. Another voice laughed faintly in the background. So she actually owns everything, Isaac responded immediately. Not really. It's my company. Always has been. The recording paused briefly as glasses clinked somewhere in the room where the conversation had taken place. Then Isaac continued. If something ever happened, I could fix the paperwork in a week. Daniel stopped the audio. He leaned back in his chair. The words themselves were not explosive, but their timing mattered. The recording had been made during a private business dinner long before the divorce, before any legal conflict existed, before Isaac had reason to measure his statements carefully. Daniel opened a new folder and saved the file. Then he called Gillian. Gillian arrived at his office later that afternoon. Daniel played the recording once without interruption. When it finished, he watched her expression. It remained calm, not surprised, not angry, just thoughtful. "You've heard this before," Daniel said. "Yes. Why didn't you mention it earlier?" Gillian folded her hands on the table. It didn't seem necessary. Daniel studied her. Now it might be. Gillian nodded. Daniel leaned forward. This statement confirms something important. That Isaac knew the ownership structure. Yes. Daniel tapped the desk lightly. And that he understood it was only a technical thing in his mind. Gillian's voice remained steady. He never cared about the structure. Daniel nodded. That's exactly the point. He replayed one line from the recording. "The paperwork is in Gillian's name because the banks insisted." Daniel paused the audio. That admission matters. Gillian looked at the speaker quietly. Daniel continued. "In legal terms, this suggests Isaac understood the formal ownership arrangement and chose not to change it for years." Gillian said nothing. Daniel closed the audio file. "And now he's attempting to change it. Without authorization." "Exactly." Daniel leaned back again. "This recording doesn't prove wrongdoing by itself, but it shows intent." "Yes." Daniel paused before adding one final thought. "And it shows confidence." Gillian looked up. Confidence the kind people have when they believe paperwork is meaningless. Gillian understood. Isaac had always believed systems existed to serve his decisions, not the other way around. Across town, Isaac sat in the Holloway Property Group office, staring at the same authorization screen that had frustrated him for weeks. The bank's portal displayed the message again. "Authorization modification pending. Managing member confirmation required. Gillian Wainwright." Isaac closed the window. He opened another set of documents instead. Corporate restructuring forms. Transfer of authority templates. Legal paperwork he hoped would eventually move the company entirely under his name. Angela Ruiz knocked lightly on the office door. "Do you have a minute?" Isaac rubbed his eyes. "Sure." Angela stepped inside holding another printed document. This came from the bank's compliance department. Isaac accepted the paper. The message was short. "Due to ongoing legal review, all authorization changes are temporarily suspended." Isaac looked up. "What legal review?" Angela answered carefully. "The preservation notice." Isaac exhaled sharply. "So Mercer is freezing the accounts now?" "Not freezing," Angela corrected. "Just preventing structural changes." Isaac stood. "That's the same thing." Angela remained calm. It's standard procedure when ownership verification is underway. Isaac paced across the office. "They can't do that." Angela watched him quietly. "They already have." Isaac stopped walking. "How long does this review last?" Angela hesitated. "That depends on what the documentation shows." Isaac said nothing. That evening, Madeline Carter noticed Isaac's mood the moment he entered the house. He moved through the living room without speaking, dropping his keys on the table more forcefully than usual. Madeline looked up from the sofa. Something happened. Isaac poured himself a drink. "Lawyers." Madeline waited. "They're delaying financial updates." Why? Isaac hesitated. "Because they're reviewing the company structure." Madeline tilted her head. "The same issue as before, yes?" She studied him carefully. "Did Gillian Etoyan design the system that's stopping you?" Isaac did not answer immediately. Madeline continued. "Kevin said she built the safeguards." Isaac exhaled slowly. "Yes." Madeline's voice remained gentle. "And they're working." Isaac looked at her. "They're slowing things down." Madeline nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe that's what safeguards are supposed to do." Isaac did not respond. For the first time since their marriage began, Madeline saw something she had not expected to see in Isaac Holloway. Uncertainty, not fear. But the quiet realization that the structures supporting his success might not belong entirely to him. Later that night, Isaac sat alone on the patio outside the house. The garden lights cast soft shadows across the lawn. He stared into the dark yard while the events of the past weeks replayed in his mind. The preservation notice, the bank records, the frozen authorization system. And now, the growing legal review. Somewhere inside thousands of files, emails, and financial statements, the story of Holloway Property Group was being examined carefully. Not the story Isaac liked to tell, the real one. The one written across years of documents bearing a single name, Gillian Wainwright. And for the first time, Isaac began to understand something he had ignored for years. Paperwork might look quiet, but when enough of it gathers together, it can speak louder than anyone in the room. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in early autumn. Not a dramatic courtroom trial with a crowded gallery and raised voices, but a formal legal proceeding held in a quiet hearing room inside the county courthouse. The purpose was narrow and procedural, to review the financial and corporate documentation connected to Holloway Property Group following the divorce settlement. Still, the outcome of such hearings often reshaped lives. Daniel Mercer arrived first. He carried 2 leather cases filled with carefully organized binders. Years of practice had taught him that clarity wins more cases than theatrics. Every page inside those binders was arranged chronologically. Emails, bank statements, authorization logs, corporate registrations, audio transcripts. He placed the binders on the long table and began reviewing them once more. At 9:12 a.m., Gillian Wainwright entered the room. She wore a simple navy jacket and carried only a thin folder. Daniel greeted her with a nod. "You're right on time." Gillian took a seat beside him. The room itself was unremarkable. Fluorescent lights overhead. A long rectangular table. 3 chairs positioned across from them where the reviewing officer and legal representatives would sit. Outside the window, the courthouse lawn looked calm and ordinary. Gillian rested her hands lightly on the table. She did not appear nervous. Daniel had noticed that about her from the beginning. Many clients arrived at hearings with visible emotion, anger, anxiety, anticipation. Gillian carried none of those expressions, only quiet patience. Across the hall, Isaac Holloway adjusted his tie while speaking quietly with the attorney he had hired only days earlier. Martin Ellis was a capable litigation lawyer with a reputation for aggressive defense strategies. But even he looked uneasy as he flipped through the summary documents Daniel Mercer had submitted. "This situation is unusual," Martin said carefully. Isaac frowned. "How?" Martin tapped the papers. "The company's legal structure is not what you believed it was." Isaac's voice sharpened. "It's my company." Martin did not argue, but he pointed to a highlighted section. "The corporate filings designate Gillian Wainwright as managing member." That was procedural. Martin sighed. In corporate law, procedures define authority. Isaac looked away. "What about the divorce settlement?" "It addressed marital assets," Martin said, "but it did not restructure corporate ownership." Isaac rubbed his temples. "So what does that mean?" Martin hesitated before answering. "It means the court will focus on documentation." Isaac disliked that word, documentation. Over the past several weeks, that word had begun appearing everywhere. Emails, bank records, authorization logs. Everywhere he turned, there were documents, and most of them carried Gillian's name. The hearing began at exactly 9:30. A reviewing magistrate entered the room, followed by a court clerk. Everyone stood briefly before taking their seats. Daniel Mercer opened the first binder. "Your Honor," he said calmly, "this matter concerns verification of financial and corporate authority related to Holloway Property Group." The magistrate nodded. "I've reviewed the summary you submitted," Daniel continued. "Our request is straightforward. We ask the court to confirm the existing ownership and authorization structures based on the documented filings and financial records." Across the table, Martin Ellis rose. "My client does not dispute the existence of those records. However, we believe they misrepresent the operational reality of the company." The magistrate glanced down at the documents. "Operational reality and legal authority are not always identical," she said. Martin hesitated. Daniel opened the first binder. "These are the original corporate filings," he explained. The clerk accepted the documents and passed them forward. The magistrate reviewed the first page. Organizing member Gillian Wainwright. Managing member Gillian Wainwright. Daniel turned another page. "These are the bank authorization records." Again, the same name appeared. Managing member approval required. Gillian Wainwright. Martin Ellis shifted in his chair. "Your Honor," he said carefully, "Mr. Holloway has operated the company for years." The magistrate looked up. "Operation is not ownership." Martin paused. Daniel placed another document forward. "This is an email written by Mr. Holloway himself." The clerk handed the page to the magistrate. The line appeared clearly. "If it simplifies the process, we'll list Gillian as managing member and primary authority." The magistrate read the sentence twice. Then she looked at Isaac. "You wrote this?" Isaac cleared his throat. "Yes." Daniel continued. "And this is a transcript of an audio recording from several years later." He placed the printed transcript on the table. "The paperwork is in Gillian's name because the banks insisted." Silence filled the room for several seconds. The magistrate leaned back in her chair. So Mr. Holloway understood the legal structure of the company. Martin Ellis spoke carefully. He may have underestimated the long-term implications. The magistrate nodded slightly. That appears to be the case. Through the entire proceeding, Gillian remained silent. She answered only 2 questions, both about procedural details. Her voice was calm, measured. No accusation, no visible satisfaction. She simply confirmed what the records already showed: the company's financial safeguards. The authorization hierarchy. The corporate filings she had submitted years earlier. Each explanation aligned precisely with the documentation Daniel had provided. Isaac watched from across the table. For the first time in years, he realized how much of the company's structure he had never fully understood. Because while he had been negotiating deals and presenting himself as the face of Holloway Property Group, Gillian had been building the legal foundation beneath it. And foundations do not disappear when people stop paying attention to them. The magistrate closed the final binder. "The documentation is clear," she said. "Based on the filings, financial structures, and authorization records, the managing authority of Holloway Property Group remains with Miss Wainwright." Martin Ellis lowered his eyes. The magistrate continued. "Any changes to that structure would require her consent." Isaac felt the words settle heavily into the room. Not dramatic, just final. Daniel Mercer nodded respectfully. "Thank you, Your Honor." The hearing concluded minutes later. No shouting, no dramatic verdict, just a legal confirmation of what the documents had already established. Outside the courthouse, the air felt cool and the sunshine still. Gillian stepped onto the stone walkway beside Daniel. "Is it finished?" she asked. "For now," Daniel said. He closed his briefcase. The records spoke for themselves. Gillian looked across the lawn. People moved quietly through the courthouse entrance. Ordinary lives continuing without knowledge of the hearing that had just concluded. Daniel studied her. "You handled that well." Gillian nodded slightly. There was nothing to handle, because the outcome had never depended on confrontation, only on patience, and the quiet strength of records that had been waiting years to be read. The news did not arrive all at once. There was no dramatic announcement, no single moment when everyone suddenly realized the balance of power had shifted. Instead, the change unfolded quietly through systems that simply began following the rules that had always existed. 3 days after the hearing, Angela Ruiz received an official notice from the bank's compliance department. Subject authorization confirmation, Holloway Property Group. Angela read the message carefully. Based on the documentation submitted during the recent legal review, the bank would continue recognizing Gillian Wainwright as the company's managing member and primary financial authority. Any structural changes to the company's accounts, loans, or operating permissions required her approval. Angela printed the notice and walked to Isaac's office. He looked up as she entered. "More paperwork?" he asked. Angela placed the document on his desk. "This is the bank's response." Isaac scanned the page. His eyes paused on the key sentence. "Primary Financial Authority, Gillian Wainwright." Isaac leaned back in his chair. "So nothing changes?" Angela answered carefully. "Legally, nothing has changed." Isaac rubbed his forehead. And operationally, Angela hesitated before speaking. "That depends on how you define operational." Isaac looked up sharply. Angela continued. "The Ridgefield acquisition cannot proceed without authorization." Isaac exhaled slowly. "And she won't sign." Angela did not speculate. "She hasn't been asked." Isaac stared at the paper for several seconds. Then he pushed it aside. "I built this company." Angela did not respond. She simply returned to her office. That same afternoon, several automated system notifications appeared inside Holloway Property Group's financial dashboard. Authorization privileges confirmed. Managing member Gillian Wainwright. Certain internal permissions were updated automatically. Large financial transfers now required direct approval. Loan modifications required managing member verification. Corporate restructuring actions were restricted. None of these systems had been created recently. They had existed quietly for years. Now they were simply enforcing the rules written into their design. Kevin Brooks noticed the changes almost immediately. He walked into Angela Ruiz's office, holding a tablet. "Did the bank update the permissions?" Angela nodded. The review confirmed the original structure. Kevin looked thoughtful. "So Gillian still controls the core accounts?" "Yes." Kevin leaned against the doorframe. "I always wondered why she built those safeguards." Angela smiled faintly. She believed businesses needed breaks. Kevin nodded slowly. "Looks like they work." Across town, Gillian Wainwright received a different kind of notification. Daniel Mercer called just after noon. "The bank has confirmed the authority structure," he said. Gillian sat at her desk, listening quietly. What does that mean for Isaac? "He can continue running daily operations," Daniel explained. "But major financial decisions now require your approval." Gillian absorbed the information calmly. In the house, Daniel opened another file on his desk. The property records remain unchanged. Owner of record, Gillian Wainwright. "Isaac can live there," Daniel continued. "But ownership is not transferred." Gillian nodded slowly. "In the company?" Daniel paused. "The company exists exactly where the documents placed it years ago, under her authority." Daniel added one final observation. "Sometimes people believe control comes from confidence." Gillian understood what he meant. "But it comes from paperwork, yes." That evening, Madeline Carter sat alone in the living room while the house grew quiet around her. Isaac had not returned from the office yet. The sun had already disappeared behind the trees outside. She opened her laptop and began searching something she had avoided looking up until now. Corporate filings. Holloway Property Group. The public registry appeared quickly. She clicked the first result. A document opened. Organizing member Gillian Wainwright. Managing member Gillian Wainwright. Madeline stared at the screen. The information was not hidden. It had been public all along. She scrolled further. Property records appeared next. Westchester County Real Estate Database. Owner of record Gillian Wainwright. Madeline leaned back slowly. The house around her suddenly felt different. Not physically, but legally. The kitchen where she cooked dinner. The living room where she filmed videos for her followers. The garden she photographed at sunset. None of it technically belonged to Isaac. And none of it belonged to her. The realization arrived quietly. But it settled heavily. Isaac returned home shortly after 9. Madeline looked up as he entered. He looked exhausted. "How did the meeting go?" she asked. Isaac dropped his briefcase near the table. The bank confirmed the authorization structure. Madeline nodded slowly. "So Gillian still controls the company." Isaac sat down heavily. Technically. Madeline studied him carefully. And the house Isaac did not answer immediately. Madeline already knew. She had read the records herself. The house is still in her name, she said quietly. Isaac closed his eyes briefly. Yes. Madeline looked around the room. The furniture, the artwork, the soft lighting Isaac had once described as the life he built. But the documents told a different story. How long have you known, she asked. Isaac hesitated. I assumed the divorce would fix the paperwork. Madeline nodded slowly, but it didn't. No. Silence settled between them. Madeline spoke again after a moment. You told everyone you built everything. Isaac looked up. I did. Madeline's voice remained calm. But the documents say Gillian built the structure. Isaac did not argue. Because for the first time, the difference between the story he told and the one written in official records had become impossible to ignore. Later that night, Madeline stood by the kitchen window, looking out into the dark garden. The house looked exactly the same as it had the day she arrived. Beautiful, comfortable, impressive. But now she understood something she had not understood before. The foundation beneath that life had been built by someone else. Someone who never needed to speak loudly. Someone who simply signed the documents that made everything possible. Gillian Wainwright. And the name that once seemed like a leftover from the past had quietly remained attached to every part of the life Isaac believed he owned. The company, the accounts, the house, everything. Because some truths do not arrive with noise. They arrive through records. And once those records are read carefully, they rarely leave any doubt about whose name was on everything. In the weeks following the hearing, nothing in Westchester changed quickly. From the outside, the house still looked the same. The garden lights still turned on automatically at dusk. The lawn service arrived every other Friday. Delivery drivers still left packages near the front steps without noticing anything unusual about the address. But beneath that quiet routine, the structure of the life Isaac Holloway had believed he controlled was gradually rearranging itself according to rules he could no longer ignore. The first shift happened inside the company. Holloway Property Group continued operating, but its pace slowed. Without authorization from the managing member, several major transactions could not proceed. The Ridgefield acquisition remained pending. 2 refinancing proposals were delayed. A potential partnership with another development firm quietly faded when the legal review became known. Angela Ruiz handled the situation with professional calm. We can continue managing the current portfolio, she explained during a staff meeting. But structural changes will require additional approvals. No one in the room asked the obvious question. Everyone already understood the answer. Those approvals belonged to Gillian Wainwright. Kevin Brooks noticed the shift most clearly. For years, Isaac's decisions had moved through the company quickly, sometimes too quickly. Now, every major proposal paused at the same point. Authorization required. Managing member confirmation. Gillian Wainwright. The systems she built were not punishing anyone. They were simply doing what they had always been designed to do. Slow things down. Long enough for decisions to be examined. Across town, Gillian Wainwright continued living in her quiet apartment overlooking the maple-lined street. Her life did not change dramatically after the hearing. She still woke early, still reviewed compliance reports for her consulting clients, still walked the same route through the neighborhood each evening. The difference was not visible in her daily routine. It existed inside the quiet knowledge that the legal structures she had built years earlier remained intact. Daniel Mercer visited her office once more to finalize several administrative steps. The court confirmation has clarified everything he said. Gillian poured tea into 2 cups. And Isaac, he retains operational involvement with the company, Daniel replied, but major financial decisions now require your authorization. Gillian nodded. And the property, Daniel opened a folder. The Westchester house remains in your name. Gillian did not react. Daniel studied her for a moment. Most people in your position would consider reclaiming the house. Gillian looked out the window. I'm not interested in reclaiming anything. Daniel raised an eyebrow slightly. What do you intend to do? Gillian thought for a moment. Resolve what belongs to me. Daniel smiled faintly. A practical answer. At the Westchester house, Madeline Carter sat at the kitchen island reviewing her phone. Her social media followers still admired the life she appeared to be living. The photos of the house continued receiving thousands of likes. But Madeline had stopped posting as frequently. Not because the house had changed, but because her understanding of it had. Isaac entered the kitchen quietly. They had spoken less during the past week. Not angrily, just cautiously. Madeline closed her phone. Did you hear from the bank? Isaac nodded. They're waiting for authorization. Madeline rested her hands on the counter. From Gillian. Yes. The word lingered between them. Madeline looked around the kitchen slowly. It's strange, she said. Isaac frowned. What is I thought I married a man who owned everything in this house? Isaac did not answer. Madeline continued. But it turns out I married a man who believed he owned everything. Isaac stared at the floor. For once, he did not attempt to correct the sentence. Several days later, Gillian arrived at Daniel Mercer's office to sign the final documents that would resolve the remaining financial questions. The room looked the same as it had during every previous meeting. Quiet, orderly. The binders containing years of documentation sat neatly arranged on the table. Daniel reviewed the final agreement. Holloway Property Group will continue operating, he explained. But ownership and financial authority remain with you unless you choose to transfer them. Gillian read the page carefully. And the property, the Westchester house, will be formally recognized as your asset. Gillian signed the document slowly. Her handwriting remained steady. Gillian Wainwright. Daniel closed the folder. That resolves the matter. Gillian nodded. There was no celebration, no sense of victory, only the quiet completion of a process that had been unfolding for years. That evening, Gillian drove once more through Westchester County. The roads were familiar. She had lived there long enough to recognize every turn. When she passed the street where the house stood, she slowed slightly. The garden lights were already on. From the outside, the house looked unchanged. Madeline's car sat in the driveway. Isaac's office light glowed through one of the windows. Gillian did not stop the car. She simply continued driving. Because the house no longer represented something she needed to return to. It was only a place where part of her past still existed on paper. And paper had already done its work. Back inside the house, Madeline stood near the window, watching the quiet street. Isaac approached slowly. She signed the final documents today, he said. Madeline turned. What happens now? Isaac hesitated. The company continues operating, and the house, Isaac exhaled slowly. It remains hers, Madeline nodded. She looked around the room one more time. I suppose paperwork matters more than people think. Isaac did not respond, because he had spent years believing the opposite. That confidence, reputation, and momentum defined ownership. But the quiet systems Gillian built had proved something different. Ownership belongs to the name written into the records. And sometimes those records wait patiently for years before anyone reads them closely. Later that night, Gillian returned to her apartment. She placed the final folder of documents into a drawer and closed it. The city outside her window continued moving as it always had. Cars passed, streetlights flickered on. Ordinary life carried forward. Gillian sat by the window for a long moment. The story of her marriage had ended quietly. Not with anger, not with revenge, only with clarity. Because in the end, she had not needed to raise her voice. She had only needed to keep the records. And the records had remembered everything. In some stories, justice arrives loudly. Arguments explode. Accusations fly across crowded rooms. Someone wins while someone else is humiliated in front of witnesses. But real life rarely works that way. Sometimes the truth moves quietly through systems that simply record what happened. Emails that never forget. Bank statements that track every number. Legal documents that preserve the exact moment a name was written onto a page. Gillian Wainwright never tried to shout over Isaac Holloway's version of the story. She never chased revenge, and she never demanded recognition. She simply allowed the truth to remain where it had always been, inside the records. And when those records were finally read carefully, they told a story no one could rewrite. A story about patience, about quiet strength, and about the difference between appearing powerful and actually holding the foundation beneath that power. Sometimes, dignity does not come from winning an argument. Sometimes it comes from walking away, knowing your name was never erased in the first place. If this story made you pause and think about the quiet ways justice can unfold, feel free to leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. And if you enjoy stories about resilience, truth, and the strength of people who choose dignity over noise, you're always welcome to subscribe and return for the next one. There are many more stories waiting to be told.